My sister is kicking me out of our parents' house, where I pay rent, leaving my daughter alone outside, but now my parents need help with the mortgage. I'm 33 years old and a single mother of a 5-year-old daughter. I separated from my husband after giving birth because he cheated on me during my pregnancy. But that's another story, so I'll share it in a later post. So, I kicked him out of my life and went to live with my parents. 2 days ago, I came home from work and found my younger sister Eva, 29, sitting with her very pregnant belly. She had moved to Croatia with her husband after their wedding. I was happy because she had been nothing but mean to me. She never liked me. There wasn't a particular reason for her hatred, but she considered herself superior to me. She manipulated our parents against me. Being the youngest, she got away with her mischief. Although she is younger than me, she is big and strong, while I am small and thin. If she grabbed my wrist, there would be no way to free myself. Anyone who saw us could tell that I could never physically fight her. However, my parents never believed me when I complained that she had hit me. They said, "She's your younger sister, how could she hit you?" So I kept my distance from her. I even avoided talking to her unless absolutely necessary. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to move away for high school, and it was a great relief. Now that monster is back in my life. Seeing her pregnant, I thought she was here for her postpartum period. I asked Mom how long she was going to stay. Eva heard me and shouted from the living room, "I'm here to stay. Do you have a problem with that?" God, she hasn't changed one bit. She's still that narcissist. Mom told me that Eva's husband had been transferred back to the United States. The company provided him with accommodation, but since Eva is pregnant, they think living with our parents is best for her. They can take care of her during the pregnancy and after the baby is born. I asked Mom if she would have time to take care of her daughter. She replied timidly, "Yes, I have to. Eva is still so young, how could she raise her child alone? She needs help." I was speechless. Seriously, Eva is 29 and can't raise her child alone. I was 27 when I had my child. I handled the postpartum period alone because my husband was busy, and my mom didn't come to help me either. She said I should learn to raise a child. It's part of motherhood. Now when her favorite daughter is pregnant, she's ready to become a nanny for her. What a hypocrite. Her favoritism has always been evident. That's why I've always kept my distance. When I separated from my husband, I rented a house and didn't go to live with my parents. But Dad insisted that I live with them. He said their house was too big for just the two of them, and besides, they would be there to take care of my daughter when I went to work, or so he said. Instead of paying rent for a separate house, I could live with them and pay them rent. It seemed like a fair deal. Besides, I was going through a lot of emotional turmoil to think clearly. Pregnancy, postpartum, husband's infidelity, divorce. So, when Dad offered support, I quickly accepted it. I moved in with them. I didn't face any problems living with them, except that the promised support for taking care of my daughter failed. Only sometimes did Mom agree to take care of my daughter. Most of the time, I had to call a nanny. She said she couldn't take care of her full time. So, I should hire a nanny while she could watch to see if the nanny was doing her job well. She wanted to take on the role of baby monitor. I found it funny, as I thought it was better to have Mom around than to leave my daughter alone with a stranger. So, I also had a full-time nanny. It's so disheartening to see how Mom is fussing over my sister to provide her with food, medicine, and supplements. She never did that for me during my 9 months of pregnancy. She barely visited me 2 or 3 times and only once after my childbirth. Since I found out Eva was going to stay here, I have a feeling she's plotting something. I mean, how could they agree to let Eva move in permanently? We don't have a house big enough to let them in. I'm happy to move out, but my daughter is too young to be left alone without supervision. Although my mom still doesn't take care of her exclusively, it feels safe to have her around. If I move out, I would always have to have a nanny at home. And besides, I don't know how safe it is to leave a child with a nanny. I know I tend to be overprotective, but I'm a single mom, and the only hope in my life is my daughter. I know I tend to be overprotective of her, but what can I do? She is my reason for living. Update 1. Thank you for all the advice, it helped me calm down a bit. My worst fear came true 2 days after my post. I came home from work to find my things packed and placed on the front porch and my daughter sitting next to them. I asked her who did this, and she said Grandma had packed everything and made her sit there. The nanny was no longer there, and it was my mother's turn to take care of her for a few hours until I got home. My daughter is a quiet and well-behaved child. The poor girl had been sitting there for hours waiting for me. I asked her where Grandpa and Grandma were. She said nothing. She just hugged me and said she had been waiting for me to come back because she was so scared of Aunt Eva. I asked if Eva had hurt or scolded her. She sobbed and said that Aunt Eva was shouting something she didn't understand, and by the way she was hitting all my belongings, my daughter felt threatened. I walked into my room furiously, shouting at Eva for an explanation. She said, "Do you want to mess with a pregnant woman? I can call the police for harassing me. You know I can do that, don't you?" I responded by saying that I can also call the police for harassing my daughter in my absence. She laughed and said, "Do you have any evidence? Mom was here when I packed your things. You know whose side Mom will take, right?" With this statement, I understood that it was useless to talk to her. I called Mom, but there was no response from her. She was at home, but had locked her room. Eva's evil laughter made it clear that everyone was against me. Eva mocked my helplessness and said, "Take a hint, idiot. Nobody wants you here. We packed for you and made it easier, don't you see? I'm pregnant and need space. My child and I are going to stay here now. Get out." I said, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not living here for free like you. I pay rent." Before I could say more, she started yelling at me like she used to do as a child. "You pay rent? Do you have a receipt or a lease agreement? No, you don't. How long are you going to be a freeloader and suck up my parents' money? You are so useless. That's why your husband found peace in another woman's bed, because you're useless. Disappear now if you don't want me to hit you in front of your daughter." My daughter ran to me and hugged me. She was petrified by all the yelling and chaos. So, I loaded my car with my belongings and left with my daughter. There was nothing left to discuss. My parents were weak in front of her. She wasn't lying when she said Mom was there. She packed. In fact, Mom and Dad must have helped her pack my things. She is 7 months pregnant and couldn't have lifted or dragged my heavy wardrobe and suitcases without their help. They are all in this together. Her husband has a decent job and they can easily afford their own house. Yet, she came after me and threw me out. She's bent on making my life miserable. She left her husband to live alone in the company apartment while she's here busy harassing me. I don't know what I did wrong. She treats me this way, and even my parents don't say a word against her. I checked into a hotel for a week and searched for a place to live. It was very difficult to manage work and house hunting. Finding a house in a week is impossible. Luckily, one of my colleagues was looking for a roommate, so I asked her to let me move in. No one wants a roommate with a baby, but I assured her my daughter wouldn't bother her, and I'd leave as soon as I found a place. She was kind enough to let me in, and I've been living with her for 2 weeks now. I found a place within my budget and within the radius of my work and my daughter's daycare, but the current tenant will take another month to move out. I've already made the reservations. I'm just waiting for it to be vacated. It's been almost 3 weeks since I moved out, or rather, was thrown out of the house. My daughter still trembles with fear, thinking that Aunt Eva will come after us and harm us. My poor child can't exactly describe what Eva did to her, but she cries that Aunt Eva was just shouting at her and glaring with wide eyes, threatening to hit her if she cried. She still cries and wets the bed sometimes. I don't know how to make her forget that incident. I feel so helpless seeing her sadden, remembering that day. I still can't understand how insecure my daughter must have felt that day. I don't understand how my sister is going to be a mother if she treats children this way. I pity her future child. Update 2. As I mentioned, I had been paying rent to live in my parents' house for the past year. Dad asked me to pay $5,000 extra besides the rent, which he would return to me later. I agreed to help him. I didn't know he was using my rent money and that extra $5,000 to pay the mortgage. Now that I've moved out, I didn't pay the rent. Dad called me on the 10th of this month in panic mode. "Why didn't you transfer the money this month?" I got a message from the bank that the auto debit failed due to insufficient funds. It made me laugh. He was so sure I would pay the rent even after moving out that he didn't even check his account balance or keep emergency funds. I said, "Hello, I no longer live in your house. Your golden daughter threw me out, remember? So why should I pay the rent?" He was silent for a moment and then said, "How am I going to pay the mortgage? I don't earn enough anymore. Sales at my store have declined. Whatever little I earn, I use for household chores. I was using the rent money and that extra $5,000 to pay the mortgage." I said, "That's not my problem. I don't owe you anything. I paid for my stay and bought my own food. Ask your narcissistic daughter to help you. I'm sure she will." And I hung up the call. Within an hour, I got a call from my mom. She said, "Your dad is struggling to pay the mortgage, and instead of helping him, you hung up the phone. Did you forget how we supported you when your loser husband left you? Is this how you thank us? Swallow your superficial pride and transfer the money you've been sending each month." I responded, "Do you even hear yourself? You let me live in your house because I paid rent, and you used it for the mortgage. I hired a nanny whenever I needed help. You didn't help. What kind of support are you talking about? She realized I wasn't going to stay silent and accept things as I used to as a child. Now I know how to respond. She calmed down. She said, "Honey, Eva is pregnant. She needs more space. That's why she asked you to move out temporarily. There's nothing to be bitter about this." I said, "She didn't ask me. She threw me out while you two chose to shut your eyes and mouth. She tortured my daughter, and I'll never forgive you for that." She then tried to defend her spoiled daughter by saying, "She's a bit immature. You shouldn't take her words to heart. You are the older and wiser one. Be the bigger person and forgive her and send us the money." I laughed and said, "I am no longer the weak doormat you could push around. You always favored her over me, and by letting her harass my daughter, you have crossed all limits of sanity. I never wanted to stay with you, but I stayed because I feared leaving my daughter alone with a nanny. But now, my daughter feels more threatened by you than by a stranger." She started sobbing and apologizing. I interrupted and said, "I'm tired of being manipulated by crocodile tears. I'm not giving another cent, and stop bothering me." They sent a few more messages asking me to continue paying, but I didn't respond. They haven't called me since. It's been almost a month since then. I think they are managing the mortgage on their own, or their golden daughter is helping them with it. I don't care what's happening in their life. I'm happy in my small cozy home with my daughter. I hired a nanny to take care of her after school. The nanny is a middle-aged woman who has a son 5 years older than my daughter. She brings her son to play with mine and they have fun together. It's so wonderful to come home to a happy, loving daughter. Life gets better, we just need to hang in there. Update 3. Hello everyone. First of all, thank you for all the love and support. It means a lot to me. And second, I'm sorry for not updating this thread frequently. 2 reasons for this. 1. I didn't have any relevant updates to share since I cut all ties with my parents and narcissistic sister. 2. I've been too busy with life. Work has increased because I got promoted, which is good, but it comes with additional responsibility, of course, and also extra salary. So I've been busy with work and motherhood responsibilities. But this time, I have an interesting update. Last week, Mom and Dad showed up at my work. They didn't know where I live, so they came to my workplace. I told the security staff to ask them to leave because I was too busy to meet anyone. I could see from the blinds on the window that they were arguing with the security staff and were unwilling to leave. They looked fragile and seemed to have aged at least 10 years, and it's only been a year. Mom was carrying a baby in her arms, and I assumed it was Eva's child. I got curious, so I went out to meet them. They started sobbing when they saw me. They came to me as their last hope to save the house. Dad said he couldn't pay the mortgage on the house for the last 7 or 8 months. All the savings he had were used to pay the first 2 or 3 months after I left. The bank gave them enough time to pay the money, but they kept defaulting. Last month, the bank evicted them and put the house up for sale. They've been living in a rundown apartment since then. They came to me for help to save their house. I listened to them patiently and asked why their pampered daughter wasn't helping them. They looked down and said her husband had thrown her out because he found out she was cheating on him, and the baby wasn't even his. All the stories about transfers and company accommodation were lies. Her husband is still in Croatia, and the divorce is in process. I was shocked to hear this. Mom cried and said they didn't know about this. She didn't tell them. She said she was here for the delivery, but after you moved out and we asked her to help with the mortgage, the truth came out. I was like, what did you do after knowing the truth? Clearly they supported her. That's why they have the child in their arms. They were like, how could we leave her in that condition? She had nowhere to go. We exhausted all our savings to pay her medical bills. Their situation really seemed pathetic. I remained silent, thinking about what to do. Without thinking of anything, I asked, where is Eva? Mom was muttering something, but Dad gave her a look and said she was at home. She refuses to go to work. Mom interrupted and said, how could she leave such a small baby and go to work? I laughed and said, really, Mom, you're still supporting her? Her baby must be around 7 or 8 months old. Women all over the world go back to work, leaving their 6-month-old babies at home, and Eva is no different. And given the circumstances she's in, she should have gotten a job much earlier. Then they pleaded for help. I said I didn't have enough money to save their house. Dad said if I could pay the overdue months, he could ask the manager to stop the house sale, and we could continue with the remaining payments monthly. I said I didn't have that much money. I used my savings to pay the deposit on my rental house and my daughter's primary school fees. Mom gestured when she heard my response. I said, "Mom, instead of making gestures, try to understand that I'm a single mother taking care of myself and my daughter on my own." After they left, I felt very depressed. My boss asked me about it. She saw me absent from my desk for more than an hour. I discussed the matter with her, and she gave me an idea. I called Dad and said I was ready to pay the accumulated mortgage and the remaining payments, but he had to transfer the house to my name. My boss suggested I buy that house with my promotion and salary increase. I should be able to pay the mortgage since I had already helped them with the mortgage for so many years, and now I was helping them save the house. It should be a fair deal for them. In return, I would allow them to live in that house but without their shameless daughter. Dad was silent and said he would discuss it with Mom and let me know. I said, "Take your time, I'm not sure if you have enough." It's been a week since then, but they haven't called me. That's a response that they don't agree with my proposal. They're fine with seeing their house being sold and living in a shabby apartment, but not letting go of their pampered daughter and living comfortably. Good for them. They made their decisions and now they will have to live with them. Today, while coming back from work, I thought about passing by my parents' house to see if the sale sign was up, but then I dismissed the idea. I decided to cut them out of my life a year ago and will continue to do so. I don't want them back in my life. I'm happy and satisfied living with my daughter and watching her grow and reach new milestones. She's now in primary school, and I couldn't be prouder. Update 4. Many in the previous post gave me an interesting piece of advice, so I'm coming back after a few months to tell you all. They told me to buy the house, but for myself, my parents' place, and that's what I did. It wasn't easy because even though I had contributed money to the mortgage, there was nothing in my name. But I spoke to a lawyer, and he told me that in this state, there was a possibility of filing a court order that would allow me to take over the debt if I paid the overdue amounts. I just had to provide proof that I had been contributing, and I did that with some messages they sent me when I stopped paying. And since I was renting, it seemed like an excellent idea to have my own home with my daughter. So we did that, which involved a lot of bureaucracy. But a couple of weeks ago, we moved back into my parents' house, which is now mine. Now, instead of paying rent, I'm handling a mortgage, which is a bit more expensive, but I think it's worth it. My daughter liked the idea of moving back into the house because we had been living there for a long time, which was good. Now I just need to redecorate, but it's a big expense, so I'll do it little by little. I'll start with my daughter's room, which we'll decorate together, and then the rest of the house. If anything new arises in my whole story, I'll come back to tell you all. Update 5. Many mentioned in my first post that I said I would talk about my ex, so I'll take this update to do that. There's not much mystery, but since I said I would, a promise is a promise. Basically, I found my husband in our bed with a coworker, and they had been doing it for a while. I was pregnant and feeling a bit unwell that day, so my boss let me leave a bit earlier, and, well, I caught them in the act. I was still pregnant and had nowhere to go, so I stayed living in the house, sleeping in another room until I had my daughter. Then I moved into an apartment and got divorced. He didn't want to take responsibility for my daughter and simply left with his coworker. After that, I didn't hear from him again because his parents had passed away and he didn't have much contact with the rest of the family. So it's not a great infidelity story as many might have expected, but maybe I made it sound very mysterious at first when I mentioned it, though I only said it because I didn't want to divert attention from the main issue. Update 6. I had this crazy idea that I dismissed because I really thought it would be very funny if it happened, but it did. And that is when I moved in and the sale sign was taken down. I thought my parents might find out that their house was sold and then come knocking on my door. They didn't know who bought it, but they found out when I opened the door on Saturday afternoon. Both my parents were standing there, and their faces were hard to explain. I wish I had known they were coming, or had placed cameras to capture their reaction. They asked me what I was doing there, and I explained everything, though always without letting them in, with me standing in the doorway. They couldn't believe it, and at first they couldn't find the words. It was as if they had short-circuited or something. But when everything finally connected in their heads, they began to ask if I had bought it for them, which made me laugh a lot. I've mentioned before that my parents' comments always make me laugh, because they're very witty with their ideas. The next thing they did was demand that I give it back, but I explained that now the deed is in my name, and so is the mortgage, so it belongs to me and my daughter. Of course, they tried to fight this, but I told them they could leave because I didn't have much intention of arguing about it, or I would call the police. So they turned around and left. although surely not very happy about it. So that was that. I know many will tell me to install cameras and such because I've read similar stories on Reddit, and that's what I plan to do. But unless they come back, I don't think I'll make another update about it. Update 7. This is a mini update since there isn't much to tell, but I promise to keep you informed if anything happened. And while it's not much, it's something worth mentioning. My sister came, although this time she already knew everything, so I didn't get to see her surprised face. I envy my parents who surely got to see that when they told her. Anyway, she demanded that I let her stay in the house, along with my parents. I simply said no, and reminded her how she treated my daughter the last time I saw her. She tried to play the pity card for what had happened to her. But I told her she had been the unfaithful one and that I was useless because I had been cheated on, so I didn't have much sympathy for her. Then I told her the same thing I told my parents, and she left too. Honestly, I don't have the time or energy to answer all their questions when they come knocking on my door, so if this becomes recurrent, I might have to try a restraining order or something. Even considering what my sister did to my daughter, I think it would be the right thing to do. What do you all think?